Alright, this is going to be a video showing how to replace the battery inside a spy watch. These instructions are going to be the same for virtually any spy watch out there on the market. So inside the watch you're going to find a battery that looks similar to this. This is the battery which powers the camera. Now if you look really close you can see that the second hand is still ticking. You see how the time is still working? Well, that's operating off a completely separate battery that's inside the watch. The camera battery, which powers the camera, is powered by this rechargeable battery, which is inside here. The actual timepiece itself, the analog clock face, is powered by this tiny watch battery. So that's why you still see the time working. But this watch will not turn on. If you try to power it up by holding the button, you get nothing. And I already tried charging it. I tried plugging the USB cable in and charging it, and it seemed to charge just fine. But then I did let it sit for like a week, and there's no charge on it. So we know that it's got a bad battery. The first thing you're going to need is a small screwdriver. This is a small Craftsman screwdriver. I actually sanded down the edge of this screwdriver in order to make it sharp so that it will fit inside this gap that's in this watch. So first thing, find this gap right here. Hopefully your watch has a gap. If it doesn't, you'll have to use some pliers or something to pop the back off, but that could damage the watch. So hopefully you have a gap like there's one on this one. So basically I hold it with two fingers on this side pushing this way, and I'm putting force in this way, and I'm also going to rotate in order to pop the back plate off. Be really careful you don't jab yourself. If you slip, you can really seriously injure yourself doing this. You hear that pop? Now, once this comes loose, you can see where there's a gap there. Do not just yank it off. Look at it really carefully, and if you look inside here, pull it off very gently. Now you can see those wires. You see the red and black wire? You want to make absolutely certain you don't just go yanking this thing out of here. One big mistake that people make when they're trying to replace the battery, they try to unsolder these two joints from the circuit board. Do not do that. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to snip these wires. We know it's a bad battery, so we're going to snip the wires one at a time. Don't ever snip wires two at a time because you can cause a short circuit. In this battery it probably doesn't matter because the battery is probably dead. But we're going to cut these wires. So we have a battery which is probably bad right here. Pull the insulation off the black and off the red. And I'm going to touch this thing to a voltmeter and we'll be able to see how much charge it has on it, if any. Be really careful when you're doing this so you don't touch the red and the black. You don't ever want to do that no matter what you're doing in electronics. Of course I cut these wires so short I'm going to have a little bit of a problem here. Okay, it's hooked up and we've got 0 volts. I'm looking over at my voltmeter over here in the corner, and you can see that it's got no voltage at all. This thing is completely dead. It's garbage. Now this is the battery that we're going to put in. I actually took this battery out of another watch that had a different problem. The other watch that I took it out of had a problem with the video. It wasn't recording right. So now we're holding the red and the black together on this battery, okay? And if you look over here, you can see the voltage is 3.91, which is just fine. A full charge on one of these batteries is going to show about 4.2 volts. Anything above 2.5 volts or so and your battery should be fine, but you really want to see something like 3.7 to 3.9 like we just did. So this battery will need a little bit of a charge once we install it, but it will work fine. Once we install this, it'll actually power up and it'll work fine. Now one trick that I learned when I was soldering components together that are small like this is you never want to, if you can help it, I'm going to show you a little trick here that you can use anywhere. You never want to have the black and the red the exact same length, because when they're soldered together and they're back in the battery, these two solder joints can eventually come and it'll be so much easier for them to touch. And if they touch, they'll short out. So I'm going to show you a little trick right here, okay? Instead of having them the same length, let's pick one of them, say the black, and let's cut it a little bit shorter. Now we use a lighter to melt the insulation so that we can strip it. You don't want to use wire strippers like metal cutters on these, because then you'll end up cutting the tiny strands of the wire, and you don't want to do that. You want to keep that all intact. So that's why I use a lighter. we warm up the insulation, basically melt it, and then just rip it off really quickly. You can start to see why we left the wires on the circuit board now. Do you see how much easier that's going to be to solder wires together rather than trying to solder these wires directly to the board? Very difficult to do. I've tried it before and I couldn't do it. So that's why we left this length on the circuit board. Now, we have a short black here and a long red here. So on this end, we need a short red and a long black. So I'm basically going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut the red approximately, it doesn't have to be exact, approximately the same amount that I took off of the black on our battery. So now when we solder these two together, you can see how when they are soldered, they're going to be far less likely to touch. So now we grab the black wire, we hold it firmly so that we don't rip it from the circuit board. Ow, man, that's a blowtorch I got going on there. I'm going to turn that down just a little bit. It already is turned down. Jeez. Okay, and then now here's the really hard part. This one's kind of short because we cut it a little short. Don't bend the wires up. Don't bend them back and forth while they're on the circuit board. This might be a little hard to do. In fact, I'm going to get a pair of pliers to do this right. So as you can see, even though we left some length here, you can see it's still a little bit difficult to get this wire strip, but you don't want to yank it off the board. Hold it firmly with the pliers, and if you didn't get it right, try it again. No, I still didn't get it. Little tricky. Oh look, see, I just melted it and it wicked back, so that's fine. Make sure you don't damage that insulation, and that's what you end up with. The next part, you're really going to want to use one of these helping hands. Okay, very good idea. And this makes it so much easier. So basically you just put the battery in the helping hands just like this, and then you just pick whichever wire you want to solder. So I'm going to get the black one ready here. Don't bend it too much. Now here's where the helping hands really comes in handy. That's why they call it helping hands. This is very handy because, whoops, all you need is just those 2 points touching. That's all you need right there. Then you grab your solder flux. This is flux. Put a tiny dab. You don't have to do this. You really don't need flux. This might be overkill, okay? Don't drip any on the circuit board, whatever you do. This is Stay Clean Flux. It helps it to, get a better joint. There's probably enough flux in this electrical solder to make the joint just fine, but I like to put that extra flux on there just in case. I got my soldering iron all heated up. I melt a little bit on there to make sure it's going, and boom, that's all you need right there. It's already soldered. Don't overdo it. You can tell that it's soldered because if you grab this, it's obviously connected. Now one thing you might want to do before you start soldering the next one, because that's a live battery right there, is you're going to want to protect it. How do you protect it? Using electrical tape. But you have to cut a little tiny piece. And this is what I do. I just cut some off onto the table, just like that. And then I cut it down the center, like that. And then I cut a tiny, basically just a tiny, this is probably too big. No, this will probably work just fine. And then basically you just come behind it. You don't need to wrap, you don't need to roll it onto it or anything like that. You just basically need to fold it. You need one fold across it. Make sure it's completely enclosed, and then press it flat. That's all you need to do. Just press it nice and flat. That way it'll lay down flat inside your watch. This one I'm going to do without the flux just to show that you really don't need it. Then I'm just kind of doing some overkill there. Okay, we're zoomed up now so you can see what I'm doing. So basically, put a little bit of solder on the tip of your soldering iron. Oh, now see how it didn't connect? I think there is a good reason why I use that flux. If it does that, you're probably going to need some flux. Make sure they're touching. Tiny bit of flux. I mean, you literally drip out half or a quarter of a drop. Oh, now I just got some on the circuit board. I just dripped some on the circuit board, and you don't really want that to stay there. So, piece of rolled up toilet paper. I'm going to roll this up into kind of a point. I'm going to get that flux off of there. Use some nice soft toilet paper here. Okay, and then we're just going to touch it down here and it wicks right up off the board. Pull the end off and do it one more time just to make sure. Wipe that off, make sure there's no flux on there. Alright, I'm going to show you one other method, which is actually one that I learned on using flux, so we don't drip onto our circuit board again, is we just coat the solder itself with a little bit of flux. Just use electrical flux. You can use the paste kind or the liquid kind, it doesn't really matter. Just like that. Okay, we've got our second joint done. And as you can see, there's not a big old glob of solder on there. It's just literally just hanging on by just a little tiny, like a saturation of the wires type of a joint there. That's really all you need on these connections. We take our little tiny piece of regular electrical tape that we've cut into a little tiny square, just like that. Once it's on there, give it a nice squish. Make sure you're not yanking up on it or putting any kind of tension on anything. Okay, now your battery's soldered in, and before you put the back on, let's just go ahead and power it up to make sure it works. Okay, we got a blue LED there, and it's starting to record right now. We know it's recording. Hello, hello, testing, testing. Okay, go ahead and stop by pressing twice, and let's shut her down. Okay, watch it shut down. Now gently flip it over. Okay, in order to reinstall the back plate, the first thing you need to do is tuck the battery up inside the back plate. Flip it around like this. I can tell the way that this was inserted before, so that you can actually read the lettering on it. And then you tuck the yellow side in first, and then you just come over here and just gently tuck in the edges, just like that. Okay, so once the battery is in, then you need to kind of look at what's going on with the wires and just kind of make sure you're putting it in such a manner that you're not going to put any excess tension on anything. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it around, because I want my soldered connections, which take up a little bit of space, I don't want them near here or here, anywhere where it's going to be too high to where the cover won't close properly. So I'm going to put the wires in this more recessed area down here in this green area. If you can see, there's more of a recess area. So we're going to put it just like that. Okay? When you press this together, you can press it together using just hand pressure. Do not try to avoid pressing on the center of this. You will destroy your watch by pressing on the center, because it will actually crush that. Your hands can have enough pressure to where it'll put pressure on this and it'll destroy it. So what I do is I go on the, first of all I kind of press it to see if it'll go on, and it won't. So go over here on the big side where there's the most gap and put your hands like that, and then just press with the thumb, the lower thumb area of your hand, and see how that popped on there. Just check the other side. Remember, go on the edge like that. Don't ever try to go in the center like this. If you go right in the center, then you can crush your watch face. Okay, it's on there, it's secured, and your watch now works. Hope this video helps. If you have any questions, put them in the commentary below.